This morning, before we go in towards reading from our passage this morning, Matthew 10, I wanted to read a psalm for you. This is Psalm 86. It says, "Incline your ear, O Lord, and answer me, for I am poor and needy. Preserve my life, for I am devoted to you. Save your servant who trusts in you. You are my God. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for to you do I cry all day long. Gladden the soul of your servant, for to you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. For you, O Lord, are good and forgiving, abounding in steadfast love to all who call on you. Give ear, O Lord, to my prayer. Listen to my cry of supplication. In the day of my trouble I call on you, for you will answer me. There is none like you among the gods, O Lord, nor are there any works like yours." Psalm 86, 1 through 8. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, I also wanted to let you guys know that we do have Children's Church this morning. Mrs. Krieger and Mr. John Krieger are in the back. And if you want to dismiss your kids at this time, they're free to go to Children's Church. If you're of the persuasion where you'd like to keep your kids with you, that's okay too. There's some bags over there by the door that you can feel free to grab, and they have coloring sheets of the like. It's your choice. You can do either one. So I've had I'm checking this to know how far I can go this way without making everyone dizzy by making the camera move too much. Some people knew me back when I was a quizzer, and they know that if I were quizzing on a stage like this, I would be from one corner to the other while I was answering, and I would make about 16 laps in the 20 seconds I had to answer the question. So I'm trying to behave myself so you don't all get dizzy. As we read Matthew 10 this morning, it's about Jesus sending out the 12. There are a number of different thoughts that Jesus kind of separates out, and they're not very clearly defined as you read through. Like, it's hard to kind of parse, like, okay, he's talking about this now, and just as you start to get comfortable, now he jumps around a bit, and there are a lot of different ideas here. And a lot of you saw the title slide for the sermon this week, and a lot of you were really excited I was talking about Bilbo Baggins, and so I got a lot of responses about that. But when I read through this, I saw a lot of parallels between the story of Bilbo as he went on his journey and these kind of the sending out moment that Jesus had with his disciples and the instructions that he gave them. It reminded me a lot of the things that Bilbo went through in his life. And so I thought we'd have some fun this morning and kind of compare not only the disciples and Bilbo Baggins, but also look at our own lives and see where that might take us this morning. So if you want to read with me, I'm starting in Matthew chapter 10 and verses 1 through 42, the whole chapter. It says, "He," meaning Jesus, "called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go to the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, preach this message. The kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Do not take along any gold or silver or copper in your belts. Take no bag for your journey, or extra tunic, or sandals, or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter, search for some worthy person there, and stay at his house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that home or town. I tell you the truth, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. Be on your guard against men. They will hand you over to the local councils and flog you in their synagogues. On my account you will be brought before governors and kings as witness to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time you will be given what to say, for it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of the Father speaking through you. going to jump down to verse 26. So do not be afraid of them. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Whoever acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before men, I will disown him before my Father in heaven. We'll stop there. So you get this sense that the 12 are very clearly being sent out by Jesus in this moment, and they've been given the authority to heal every disease and sickness and to drive out demons. And he gives them this massive task where he says, you don't have to go out to the Gentiles and to the Samaritans, but you just have to save the lost sheep of Israel, which at the time was probably farther than most of them had traveled in their lives. And so it's just like, if I were to stand up this morning and say, okay, well, our task as Albion Free Methodist Church is we don't have to go to Mexico this year, but, on this trip, we're just going to save New York, the state. That's all we're going to focus on right now. And it's this thing where, you get this thing that, it sounds like he's being really restrictive, but really he's just giving a direction. This is who you're going to. And you get this sense that the apostles, up to this point, really haven't done anything entirely all that impressive. You've got the feeding of the 4,000 and 5,000 a few chapters earlier, and the disciples immediately forget about that, and they forget all the things that Jesus has done, and they start asking themselves, oh, what's going on? And then they find themselves in the boat when Jesus is, sleeping in the bottom of the boat, and they're freaking out because they're concerned that they're going to drown. But Jesus just wakes up and just stills the waves. So they've seen all of these awesome displays of his power, and yet you get the impression that they just don't feel ready or confident that that's going to continue. Like it just hasn't sunk in for them yet, maybe. And Jesus's response to this is to send them out and say, here, go do what I've been doing. You have the authority. Go do these things. And they go out and they do them. And I get the impression that a lot of times as Christians, we hear the call to do something, and we find ways of convincing ourselves we didn't really hear it because we don't feel ready, or we're not sure, or there's this new big thing that I think that would be really great if we could do that, but what if I can't? What if it doesn't work out? And so the first step of any calling or any new adventure is to walk out the front door. There's that famous quote of Bilbo where, Frodo's talking about what his Uncle Bilbo always said. Well, it's always a scary thing walking out your front door because you never know where the path is going to take you. And so a lot of times going on the adventure or accepting the call of God to go do something means you have to acknowledge, I may not know exactly where this is going to end up. And sometimes you find yourself in places you'd never expect. And so if we were to ask ourselves this morning, what is our calling? What is our adventure? Bilbo had a nice clear thing laid out for him, or maybe not so clear, because all of a sudden he had a wizard knocking on his front door one morning, and he said, here, you're going to take 1/14th share in an adventure, and you're going to go and you're going to be the burglar, and you're going to figure out a way to kill this dragon, and then you're going to be rich and you're going to come home. And Gandalf didn't even lay it out all that well. It was very much just kind of surprising and catching him off guard, and suddenly there were 13 dwarves in his house throwing around his dishes, and it was entirely disconcerting. And yet, if we're looking for some sort of certainty, the only certainty we have as Christians is that God is with us. And yet that's enough sometimes. And so when we look forward and we think about, well, what should we be doing? What new thing is coming next? It shouldn't be I hope I'm up to it. Because in all reality, likely we aren't on our own. But the good news is, what we're called to do and what we're given the responsibility to do, we're also given the authority to do. And so when Jesus sent them out, he didn't say, well, you guys have it all put together, so you can go out and do these things. Just shoot, I'll see you in a month. He kind of framed it in the beginning with, I've given you the authority to do these things. You have this power that may not be your own. It's certainly not. But you have it. I've given it to you. And so there was, along the way, Bilbo stepped out the front door, and he was a hobbit, and he liked his tea, and he liked his first and second breakfast, and 11sies, and luncheon, and supper, and dinner. And yet he found himself on the trail where he might get breakfast and an apple for lunch, and maybe dinner, if he's lucky, or maybe not. And so it's this new thing, and yet he was given help along the way. So once we step out the front door, you get this kind of odd set of instructions from Jesus about how to go about doing this thing. Because you get, Jesus tells the disciples, don't take extra money, don't take an extra staff, you don't need a bag with supplies, you don't need sandals, a spare pair of shoes, just go. Because the worker is worth his wages. And so you get this feeling like if you were in church this morning and I said, all right, every one of you has some sort of vehicle that you got here with. So I want each of you to go out, hop in your vehicle, take whatever you've got with you, and go on a short, 2-day missions trip. Just call in sick or something, or call in and take vacation days if that would be the more honest option, I suppose. And you need to go on this 2-day missions trip, and you just kind of travel in one direction. We'll go east towards New York City, and we'll meet back here on Wednesday, and we'll talk about it. Don't go home. Don't get any extra supplies. Just drive east on 90 and stop wherever you stop and do ministry. And if you see sick people, heal them. It's as soon as you start transplanting what Jesus said into like modern terms, it seems just absolutely out of this world crazy. Like I don't do I have that much faith? Can I do this? I don't know. And it makes you ask yourself difficult questions. And so when I look at Bilbo's kind of do I stay on the straight and narrow instance was when he and the 13 dwarves are going through Mirkwood, And for those of you who are familiar with the story, you know that Gandalf wasn't with him at this time. So the wise one with all of the power and the knowledge and the one who knew what he was doing wasn't there. But he said, look, here's a path. If you follow this path and you go straight, you will be all right. If you leave this path, you will get lost and you will likely starve. And so, that sounds very dire, It's just so the Bilbo and the 13 dwarves, they start traveling and they've got these nice big heavy packs and they're complaining about how heavy their packs are. And they start walking and their packs start to get lighter as the days and weeks wear on, and they start running low on food. And finally, they're completely out of food, and they're walking. And at one point, Bilbo climbs a tree to see if, are we even close? And he can't see the end. And they're tightening their belts and losing belt loops, and they're getting skinnier, and they're out of food. And finally, they have this experience where they're on the path, and they're starving. And they can see just off the path, just barely in the distance, they can see a party and a fire, and they can almost smell the food. And so now they start arguing with one another. Well, do we leave the path? Do we trust what Gandalf said? Or do we go get the food because I'm starving? And they end up leaving the path, and that's why they end up trapped forever. And I won't ruin the movie for those of you who haven't seen the new one. But it's one of those things where it's hard to take what you've heard in the past and what you believed to be true and to continue to do the right thing, even when it seems like there's so many reasons to compromise. And so if you find yourself on this adventure or on this trip that you believe God has sent you on, you may have that moment when you feel like your pack is empty, you have no food, you're starving, and you're like, well, if I just do this other thing, I can almost see the benefits if I were to just kind of make a little short detour. That's the difficult thing, is because sometimes it's hard to trust in God's wisdom when our wisdom seems so right here and right now and so easy. But you've got to remember that if God has told us to do something, God doesn't just ask us to do things we can't receive the power to do. If God says go, then he will give us the power and the support as we go. If we make our own choices, we may lose his support. And I'm trying really hard not to put this in like a formulaic 2 plus 2 equals rich kind of terminology. It's not that God will, bless us as long as we're doing exactly that one right thing on the right path. But I think what God really rewards is that attitude of submission. Are we doing our best to do what he has asked us to do? I believe that God blesses those decisions because he sees a contrite, obedient heart, and he says, this is someone who is trying to do what I asked them to do, and I want to support this person. So if you're concerned and you're faced with a decision and you don't know whether to go right or left, you don't need to sit there agonizing because you don't want to make the wrong decision, because God will smite you for it if you pick the wrong one. I firmly believe that if you have a difficult choice in front of you and you're trying to figure out, maybe you don't know. Maybe it's not choosing between here's the path and then there's something I want. Maybe you're standing at a fork in the path and there's no way to tell the difference. Sometimes you get in those points in life where you know what God wants you to end up at. You know what God's calling for you is. You know where you're supposed to end. You just don't know how to get there right now. And so when you hit those forks in the road and those decisions, I believe that God gives wisdom to those who ask. Scripture tells us that. And I believe that if you go into that decision saying to yourself, I want to do your will, God, I don't know what the right path is. Help me to make this right decision. I believe that God in that moment will help you make the right decision. And I believe that even if it doesn't turn out as well as you hoped, I believe that God will be with you in your attempted obedience. And I think that there's hope in that. I think it's an attitude of the heart that matters far more. And sometimes, I'm going to jump ahead, and this is the part where I'm going to leave the scripture story because, we're not supposed to talk about when the disciples get back from this trip and what they do next yet. That's for another sermon. But as I got thinking about this idea of going on an adventure, adventures are dangerous. And Bilbo didn't come back the same hobbit he was when he left. Even though he was successful. Spoiler alert, they do kill the dragon. Sorry. But even though Bilbo was successful, and even though he came back, and even though he came back with, all of his fingers and toes attached, unlike Frodo, he still came back changed. He came back, for those of you who know Lord of the Rings, he came back with this ring that he could put on and turn invisible, which seems like a really cool thing, but he became dependent on it, and it kind of started eating away at him from the inside out. And eventually, he heeded the advice of Gandalf. Gandalf was this really smart guy. He was a wizard. He's supposed to be a smart guy. And he convinced Bilbo to give it up. And so this thing that was near and dear to Bilbo's heart, that was hurting him, he gave up. But it didn't immediately cure him. And if you read ahead and you read the rest of Tolkien's trilogy, you read The Lord of the Rings, you see Bilbo later on as Frodo comes through a haven, a safe refuge. And Bilbo is there, and he's attached to this ring. He immediately has to start asking about the ring because he's still torn up about it. He's still torn up inside. He's still dependent on something that he shouldn't be. And it's not until the very end of the last book, which is ending number 13 if you watch the last movie. It false ends 14 times. And right at the end of the movie, you see Frodo and Bilbo, these two people who have both handled this ring, and Frodo's the one that eventually destroys it. And the ring is gone, but they're both still sick. Because the cost of the adventure has worn on them. The cost of doing the right thing and the pain and the wounds that kind of get to them over time have changed them. They're not whole. They need to be healed. And even though they'd been relaxing at home or, like I said, in that safe refuge, Bilbo had been there for 80 years or so by this point, it still wasn't made right yet. And so at the very end of the book, I think Tolkien, I think there was a part of him, for those of you who don't know, Tolkien was a Christian. He was a friend of C.S. Lewis. I don't think he wanted to leave that unfinished. Because at the very end of Tolkien's last book about the ring and Frodo and Bilbo, he has Frodo and Bilbo leaving, and they sail west to where no one had ever been. And they're sailing to a place where they would find healing, where they can find someone who is able to take care of them, to right that wrong that had been done in their lives. And Tolkien hated straight allegory, but there's a very clear message in that interaction that Frodo and Bilbo have with this ring, that sometimes the going on an adventure hurts. Sometimes doing the right thing hurts. But the good news at the end of the story is that there is one who can heal. And so I look at Jesus as he sent out the disciples. I imagine, we don't have like a point-by-point blow of what each of the 12 disciples did as they went on this journey. And we don't have, their report when they came back and told Jesus. But I imagine some of them came back and said, that was horrible. It didn't work out. Sometimes it went well, but sometimes it was, like I went hungry and I got chased out of town. And, Jesus warns them ahead of time, be wary of the governors. Be wary of the people in charge. They're going to persecute you. Jesus elsewhere says, in this world, they're going to hate you because they hated me first. But take heart, I have overcome the world. And so that's this dichotomy we've got as Christians, is that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't work out well for us in the short term. Sometimes doing the right thing costs us something. And sometimes we don't get that cost back right away. Bilbo lived for close to, I think it was 150 years or so, before he finally left and sailed west and could put down that burden for good. Sometimes it's a long time. Healing is a long process. But just like Tolkien couldn't left that story unfinished, I think that God is the same way. I think that God refuses to allow his servants to remain unhealed forever. And sometimes I have no good answers. I don't know why the healing doesn't come quickly. And I could say something about how suffering produces perseverance. And that's true, but it doesn't make it any better. And sometimes, if you read John Wesley much, John Wesley talked about how free will sometimes introduced evil and consequence into this world. Sometimes suffering is in this world also, and those are not good things. Don't let anyone tell you that choosing to disobey God, well, it's a good thing in the long. No, it's not a good thing, period. It's a bad thing. Suffering is bad. But we serve a God who can make it right in the end, even if it's not right now. And so that's this hopeful feeling that I get as some of you look at me and they see this 27-year-old kid. Some of you teens look at me and you see an old guy who has no idea what's really going on in the world. And they're both true. But as I look at the course of my life and where I've been and where I'm likely to go and where I am now and what I have as my responsibilities, the things that God has given me authority and responsibility to do, I'm excited because I know that there is a plan. That God knows what will happen next week or tomorrow morning when my alarm goes off, or next year or 10 years from now or 50 years from now. He knows those things. And I serve the one who knows. I serve the one who loves. I serve the one who has given me a responsibility so that I can serve him in a meaningful way. It's contrary to popular opinion. I don't believe that heaven is a cloud and a harp. I think that our work probably won't even be done in heaven. But I think that it will be work without suffering. I think that we have been called to work and serve God, to be his image on this earth, to manage things for him, to do what we can to serve others, and to bring them into fellowship with him. Those are useful and good things to do. And I think that part of who we are is wired for adventure. We're wired to serve and to do things for him. We're wired to want to know what's the next thing, what's the next challenge, what's around the next bend in the road. And so yes, it can be a difficult decision to follow that sometimes. It can be a difficult decision to say yes and take that first step out your front door and almost fall down the stairs. Take that first step out the front door and say, I don't know where I'm going to end up, but I want to take this step because he asked me to. And along the way, you may be hurt. You may have things happen to you that seem to have no reason at the time. But I do know that in the end, we serve a God who heals. And that's what I cling to. I know I serve a God who sees the end, and he is good. He is able to do more than we could ever ask or imagine. The end is coming, and the end will be good for those who serve him. And so that's what I find myself thinking every Monday morning when the alarm goes off, and I'm thinking, oh man. Or if I'm honest, every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when the alarm goes off and I don't want to take that first step out of my bed because my apartment's colder than it is in bed. But that beginning is a good thing. The service and the process is a good thing. Staying on the path as best we can is a good thing. But even when Bilbo and the 13 dwarves got off the path, they got back on eventually. There's always hope for that restoration and healing. There is a way back. There is a way back to him. And I think that as long as we seek that, he will be with us. He will support us. He will sustain us. And he will reward us for that. So as we go forward this week, we had the healing service last week, and it was a great time of prayer. And if you want to take a time at the altar at the end of the service, we're going to close, actually, in the next minute or so. But I think that taking time to pray and taking time to seek God's will, or seek God's support, or seek God's healing is a good thing. And so if you want to take a moment to do that up front, that's fine. If you want to head out back and grab some donuts, that's fine. But this week, I just wanted to place that before us, to know that there is work to be done, there is adventure to be had, and there is healing in the end, because we serve a good God. So pray with me. Father, I thank you for who you are, and I thank you that you make decisions on my behalf for me sometimes. And I thank you that you give me direction, and that you give me responsibilities and authority. And I thank you that you will restore all my hurts and pains. And I wait on that day. Father, I thank you for this congregation and the force for good and for you that we are. And I pray that we would not waste an opportunity. I pray that we would be dedicated to you first and foremost, and that our feet would hit the floor every morning thinking, what will today bring me? What can I do to serve my God today? I know that you will bless those thoughts, that you will support us in those endeavors, and that you will give us the authority to accomplish your will. I pray that we would be found as those, when your eyes rove to and fro over the earth, that you would find in us a people that is willing. I pray that your spirit would be on our church as we look for new ministries in 2014, new ways to serve your people. I pray that you would give us your heart for our community and for one another. Amen. Go in peace.